Hi, everyone, and welcome to the inaugural edition. We don't know if it's going to be a recurring thing, so I won't say first annual, of Office Hours Live, where we get to have a conversation about something that's been rumbling in the field, rumbling in our circles of conversation. And today, given the time of year, near ACPA, near NASPA, near just general, what am I doing next time, we are talking the job search. So today I invited Marci Walton, super brilliant human extraordinaire, to join me to talk about this. Say hello, Marci.
Hi, everyone. Great to see you. Thanks to Amma for reaching out to me to get on this bandwagon of essay search stuff. I'm super excited as somebody who's been a candidate multiple times, and I'm now running a search. So being able to give lots of information, and I like talking about myself, let's be honest. And now it's recorded. So this is just like the best of all worlds. Yeah, so excited to get started and chat about job search things.
So we wanted to each start with an opening statement, as it were. So something we wanted to have out there in the open from the beginning before we got into the actual meat and content of your questions and other things we wanted to cover. So Marci, since you mentioned being live, I think that speaks to the opening argument you wanted. So please proceed.
Absolutely. So Anna and I had a phone call a couple of days ago, and this is how my brain works. I'm like, okay, I have this idea from a scene from America's Next Top Model where Tyra says to Tiffany, we're rooting for you. We're all rooting for you. And that's just like on this loop in my head in terms of employers to candidates. So I think there's this really harmful, I don't know if it's a stereotype or just a vibe of like, woo us, like make us love you. And I think employers are genuinely like, we want you to succeed. We want you to have great interviews. We want you to knock our socks off. I don't think there's anybody out there that's like, man, I really hope this person sucks. And I really hope our half an hour at TPE is just awful. Or like, man, bomb this phone interview so I can go to lunch earlier. There's probably a couple knuckleheads here or there, but I would say overall, we just want you to succeed. So if you sort of like carry that underneath your boots as you kind of go into the search and continue, that we are behind you, even if we, I have a horrible resting face. So unless I'm making that expression, I look mean. So some of us just have those faces, and that's nothing to do with your answer. But we really want you to do well. And I think just kind of tucking that in your pocket will be super helpful as you go into the search.
Well said, and I definitely agree. Having been on both sides of it, I mean, I am the kind of person that takes faces pretty seriously, but I'm also the kind of person that has a very aggressive resting face, so I would never want someone to think that of me. So some of it's a little bit of perspective taking, but we are rooting for you, we promise.
Mm-hmm.
So my opening statement is a note to those of you who are getting ready to do what are regrettably called placement conferences, but should probably actually be called something else. In the same way that a writer I actually know that writes about online dating talks about online dating being a poor name for it because it's basically just an online introduction site and then the dating happens outside. In the same way, a placement conference shouldn't be placing you. You can't leave it with a job unless you've had prior conversations or have had all the other parts come together and placement is the last part. And that's exceedingly rare. So the idea that we have going into placement, you're very hyped up and you're like, I'm going to meet a school, I'm going to leave with a job, and then I won't have to worry about anything. Can happen. It shouldn't happen, because if you're thinking about the kind of campus that you want to be on or the kind of position that you'd want to be in, having a conversation with somebody for half an hour as you're surrounded by other people having their half-hour conversations isn't going to give you the best version of yourself, but it might give somebody an idea and an opportunity to speak with you a little bit further, to speak with you on their home turf, what could hopefully be your home turf. So look at placement as that. It's an opportunity to have a conversation, likely the first conversation, and then hopefully there will be others, and you'll be able to see it as valuable for that. Even the informal conversations, even the conversations you have with fellow people being placed. I did placement almost 6 years ago now, and I still talk to some of the people that I met in those rooms. So those relationships can stick as well. So don't look at it as I'm getting a job. Look at it as I'm having conversations that will hopefully get me to a job.
Absolutely. And Amma and I wanted to kind of go through our search processes so you can just real briefly, not like I had all of these interviews, But you can kind of see where our backgrounds are, which will, I think, hopefully give you some context for how we're answering questions. So I guess a little bit about me. I'm currently in Res Life. I am the Associate Director of Res Life for Xavier University in Cincinnati, and I've been here for, oh my gosh, 6 weeks, which seems both forever, and I just started, which is awesome. I have been in the field going on a decade. I did, oh my God, more than a decade. Oh God, freaked me out a little bit. So I did my TPE search, oh wait, no, 9 years. I can't do math when I'm stressed out, and I can't spell like on the board either. It's just my brain doesn't work.
It's totally fine.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Calm down. So I actually did my TPE search at the last joint conference between ACPA and NASPA in 2007, which was the most overwhelming experience of my life. And I'm an extrovert. I think there were, 1,500 candidates and over 1,000 employers. So it was huge, and I had 22 first round interviews. Don't do that. It was poor planning. Please don't have 20 interviews. But I was convinced I was not going to get a job. So I was only searching Res Life. I ended up at a great school on the West Coast, and then was there for 4 years. And then my subsequent searches were very, very narrow. So I fell in love with a specific type of education, Jesuit higher ed, and there's only 28 schools. So I've only searched within a 28 school kind of radius outside of my TPE experience. So you talk about narrowing a search and like making it work because you really want to work at a specific place. I'm your gal. And then between all of those, also serving on search committees has been the best way that I've improved as a candidate. Because when you're looking at 100 resumes, you're like, oh my God, I did that. And everyone on the committee hated it. So I'm going to change that for the next time. And then my last 2 searches were mid-level searches, one from entry level to mid-level, and then assistant director to associate director. So that's a little bit about my path and hopefully what I'm going to bring to the conversation tonight.
Excellent.
Take it away.
My search, even starting from the beginning, was under fairly different circumstances from Marci. So my TPE experience and placement overall took place in 2011. And I believe I had 7 interviews at TPE, which for me was more than enough. Keeping all of those straight, being able to have the energy to do that experience. So meet with 7 different groups, actually 6 and then 1 twice, combined with being in a cohort that went. So there were 19 of us that went out of 30. So most of my friends were there. Staying with a lot of people, which Marci identified her, 22 interviews is too many. 4 people is too many to stay within a room. 5 people in a room is too many, and I don't recommend it, especially to the introverts in the group. You will feel it. Don't do it. So I would say that experience was a good one for me because I had, again, an opportunity to get to know those in my classes a little bit more. Even though we were already a very close group, I met a lot of new people. And while I didn't actually get a position from any of those interviews, it ended up setting me up to work well with people who I did eventually end up in a position with. I know we have a question somewhere in the questions that we got about how many jobs to apply to. We were told by our capstone instructor 50. The job that I ended up getting was my 51st. That is the absolute truth. So it's a big number, and you never know where it's going to hit. But yeah, I did 51, and that ended up being mine. So I was at Florida State for a little bit over a year, and then ended up deciding to search again. I loved the position, some of the best coworkers I've ever had, and wonderful students, but the area wasn't a good fit for me. And I thought that that was something that I could sacrifice originally. It ended up not being. So I ended up going from Tallahassee, Florida, at Florida State, to Boston, Massachusetts, where I am now. I was most recently at Emmanuel College for 3.5 years in student activities, and then made an unconventional jump and decided to carry on higher education, but in a non-campus-based capacity. So what I do now is I consider myself a higher ed free agent, in which you can pick me off waivers, use me for what you need me for, and then put me right back. So I consult on campuses, I speak with students, and I also do things a little bit more generally in the corporate environment as well. So same type of education, same things that I want to share with students and love learning from them, but I don't do it just one place. Now I do it a number of other places. So while I was moving through that path, I also had the opportunity to serve on several search committees at increasingly higher levels with a little bit closer eyes on everything as we went. So I'll also be speaking from that capacity as far as what to look for, what to do, what not to do, and what the people on the other side of the table might want to see out of you.
Love it. So that's a little bit about us. We want to get to the questions first so we can kind of front load this. So one of the questions that we came across was, what's your advice for job searching while you currently have a job? So not the, I'm an SA grad and I'm doing a thing that 40 other people are doing at the same time, but I am job searching and I'm currently employed. So that has been my experience the past 3 times I have done a search. The first time was, there were term limits associated with my position. So it was 4 years and out. So everybody knew I was leaving. So that was kind of easy. But the last 2 times were a little more, I don't want to say precarious, a little bit more of a tightrope, because it's this constant flow of you need to do right by your employer, but you also need to do right by yourself. And it's what's more important, what, you know, am I gonna burn this bridge, or am I gonna burn out myself? And it's a constant state of push and pull. So I think something that's important for me was definitely communication with my employer. I've been lucky that I've had 2 really great supervisors that were super supportive. But realize, like, that's a privilege in and of itself. Like, not everybody has a great supervisor, and not everybody has a supervisor that's like, yes, I'm behind you, whatever you need, let me call, let me be a reference, let me, you know, look at your materials. So I think first, when you're doing a job search, is assessing that relationship of what are you currently getting from your supervisor, what is anticipated response from them going to be, and I think most importantly is how am I going to still do my job in an excellent fashion, so my job search is not taking me away from the job, because, like, yeah, you've been great for 3 years, but then the past 6 months you've been terrible because you're doing all of these other things or constantly leaving or just checked out. And that's going to be the last impression, and that's what is going to be what is on references' minds. In terms of, like, when do I tell people that I'm searching, I think it's really personal. One of my searches, my boss knew every single application that I put in, mainly because I was a nervous wreck and, like, had to talk about it. But the last one I didn't tell until I had my second phone interview and thought I was coming to campus. So I think going on an on-campus interview and not letting your supervisor know, in my opinion, that's a little shady. But I think up until that point, I think it's personally, I think it's fine to keep it a little more close to the vest. Because the other thing is, if you're not making it to an on-campus and you tell maybe your shaky relationship boss that you're searching, that could really impact your relationship when you don't know if anything's coming from it. You know, on campus, you have, you know, a 50% chance, a 1 in 3 chance of getting the job. And I think from an employer point of view, that would be the bare minimum that I would expect from my supervisees.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree. I think that when you're going through the job process initially, you're always told, and I know that I was told several times, searching for a job is your job. But that can't be your job when you have a job, because your job is your job. So recognizing that your time is going to be divided between the thing that you've already committed to and are getting paid to do versus the thing that you might be seeking out, and being very careful, regardless of the circumstances, to treat it as such. So you are still employed, you're still required to do any number of things that are still associated with your position. So your job search should be placed appropriately within that same environment. And I also agree very, very heavily with what Marci said about the role of the supervisor in it. I've been really lucky. When I had prior positions with supervisors that needed to know, they were very supportive about it. But I also know that that was something that was really important to me when I started looking, was someone who, as a supervisor, was really supportive of me growing, even if that growth meant that it wasn't going to be with them. And I know my most recent position, that came up unprompted from my most recent past supervisor. He said that from the beginning. So that was something that I kind of knew was in place. So when it was time for me to kind of say, I need to do something else, I had an idea of how that conversation was going to go. And the same was true for the supervisor before that, especially because the search that was going on was moving very quickly, and she was gone for a lot of it. It just happened to happen while she was on a longer vacation. So there were a lot of things that I'd wanted to say in person that ended up being over the phone. And I had to know that the relationship was okay enough that that was going to be all right. And that was important too. So I would say, think about it in terms of the environment that you're going into, that if that was something that you had to look at, that was going to be okay or something that you would be all right handling. And I'm seeing a related question that we may want to go ahead and address, saying, how is it really perceived if you leave a position after a year? So, Marci, you've dealt with it a little bit more recently than I have, so I'll let you start.
Yeah, so I left my last position after 18 months, and that is the question that was ringing in my ears the entire time I was applying. I wrote a brief blog post about it called, oh my gosh, what did I call it? When the perfect job isn't perfect for you. And that's really what my experience was like. I realized that I wasn't being authentic to the experience that I wanted or the experience that I thought that my supervisor and my students deserved. So I think what's important for me from an employer point of view is being upfront about that, of saying, somewhere in there of, it perhaps wasn't a great fit, or circumstances have changed, or I'm moving to be with my partner, or, my parents got sick or something. I don't think it's an issue if it happens once. I think it's an issue when it becomes job hopping. That if you're consistently spending a year, 18 months, 2 years, and then moving, that's kind of a red flag to an employer of like, okay, we're going to invest a lot of time and training and energy and relationship building to you. Are you going to then leave, next summer or, 3 months from now? So I think it's the balance of you need to be happy. If you're not happy in a position, your students aren't getting the best experience possible. And I think if you can sometimes separate this like pressure of the field of like, there's a right way to do student affairs. It's BS. Like there's a right way to be a good practitioner, and that's doing right by your students. So if you can say, I'm not doing that, I need to leave, I would have so much more respect for you as an employer than somebody who stuck around for 5 years because it was easy or because they didn't feel like searching. So I may be in the minority. I may be, like new school, or maybe I'm, because I just did it, I'm like, no, it's fine. Said, internal monologue, you're fine. But I think it's, again, about how you leave. So are you leaving after a year and like you just throw your crap up in the air and expect everybody to pull around you and do your work for you? Or are you leaving and exiting in a graceful, respectful, professional manner, which sets the next person up in that position for success? So I think if you can leave well, it's less about when you leave and more about how you do it. Those are kind of my, 14 cents.
I agree. I think that in any situation where you're leaving, as long as you're in a position to leave the person ahead of you, set up for success to do so. I'm not going to say that it doesn't matter when you leave, because it does matter when you leave, but I think that it is looked upon more favorably if it was, oh, we only had this individual for a year, but they were able to contribute a lot, and the person after them was able to do some really great things as a result of what they did. So I know I've actually left 2 positions after a year. One was prior to grad school. I had a non-campus student activities position just before I did grad school, and I left that position after a year to go to school. So that was a very different conversation. But I also left my first professional position after grad school after a year. But that was, again, something that was actually really tied into conversations that I had had with my supervisor. She was very, very upfront about wanting to know how I was doing outside of work, and she knew that I was struggling. So when I said, this isn't the right place for me anymore, it wasn't a surprise. She understood that, and I had previously been able to articulate it. So I think that while I can't dictate whether you're going to have that type of relationship or not, it will be easier to leave something after a short period of time if it's not a surprise to anyone, as is the case for anything. If people aren't blindsided, they tend to deal with it a little bit better. So I think depending upon the relationship that you have and depending on the relationship you have with your students, and I know that I had students that knew that I was having a hard time, so they understood it. And that was the most valuable thing to me, was I didn't want to let them down. We had that conversation. A lot of them, they were sad, but they got it. And being able to ground what you're doing in, again, as Marci said, what's right for the people that you're there for. And that's not you, and that's not your supervisor, that's your students. Then I think it would feel a little bit easier. So I hope that answers the question. All right, so now I want to jump to one about process. So we had a question, and actually grounded in a prior conversation, about providing questions prior to interviews. So I love this idea, especially as somebody who is a strong champion for introverts who like to be prepared for this sort of thing, because it gives you the opportunity to expend that energy prior to arrival. So you're not scrambling for all that information, burning your internal battery trying to come up with a response, because you have the ability to practice in advance. So those who are on the employer side, I recommend this. I do. And I don't see it as any different than a study guide that a professor would provide students, to give students the best opportunity to know, to show what they know. You can give them study guides or an idea of what's going to be on the test. Similarly, to get the best opportunity to know what a candidate's going to be able to do, they might need a little bit more time to come to that. And that's okay. So being able to provide those questions, if possible, would be really, really helpful. So the question that we have is, do you think it would be appropriate as a candidate offered an interview to ask directly for interview questions ahead of time? And that's a slightly different question. I personally would really appreciate that in a candidate. I don't know that that's a universal opinion, but I think framing it from the idea of, I want to be the most prepared that I can, and being able to assert that that's how you work, there's actually something really positive in that, because you know ahead of time that that person wants to make sure that they have the resources. They're not afraid to ask questions that might be a little bit outside of the box, and that's helpful. So I would say, yeah, if you're a candidate and you feel like you need that and that it will significantly affect your performance, I would definitely ask for them. I would also say, I'm going to throw a shout out to Mike Lynch, who is creating a collaborative Google Doc of common interview questions. So if for some reason you're not comfortable asking, or are told that they're not prepared or you can't have them, he's putting together a bank of questions that you can practice with that are fairly common and can give you some of that prior studying that can keep you, again, from burning those energy stores while you're in the interview.
Mm-hmm. And I would also say, don't be surprised if they say no. I would say this is a fairly new thing. I haven't heard of a ton of people doing it. I know for our first round TPE candidates, I gave the the category of these are the things that we're going to be talking about. So you can think about it ahead of time, but not giving the exact question. Because I felt like that was helpful without really waiting to process one way or the other. But something else that you can do is not just, you should read the mission statement, but not just peruse over things, but really dig in. So I know for us, when we were developing questions, we literally had the job description on one side and the interview questions on the other, and went point by point in the job description of how are we assessing whether or not you can do point A, point B, point C. So even if you don't feel maybe confident enough or feel like this is maybe a little more of a traditional department, you can maybe anticipate those in more productive and meaningful ways than just going in and be like, okay, I think we'll probably talk about this. Be ready to go. Know that job description front ways and back ways, and you may be more prepared than even you kind of give yourself credit for.
And I'll also make one additional point to any employers who may be watching, or people who might be on a search committee, or advice to store away for future time on a search committee. So I know that there's always a lot of consternation and not criticism, but we pay very close attention to the questions that candidates ask. Mm-hmm. And I'm of the belief that if you give candidates the questions that they're supposed to answer, they can write really informed questions based on what they're going to be asked. But if you don't give them that and you answer the questions that they have, they're going to look unprepared. It doesn't mean that they're unprepared. It just means that the questions that you asked, they answered. So I think that an added benefit to get a little bit deeper and a little bit more crunchy questions is to give people the opportunity to know what information will they be providing and what information do they additionally need. Mm-hmm. So I like to think that's another added benefit of giving questions, is that that end question piece has to dig a little bit deeper because a lot of things are already addressed. So hopefully that will inform some of you who do decide to do searches later on.
Absolutely. Another question that actually came through Twitter, which gets to another one that was asked through the Google Hangout, is kind of searching across functional areas, or Odessa from Twitter. I feel like really fancy saying this, like I'm some sort of radio host or something. Asked, what do you see are the most transferable skills throughout student affairs that are important to highlight? And also thinking about transferable skills from one position or one functional area to another. So for me, I firmly sit in res life. I'm going to be a res lifer for life, I think, and often see candidates who are looking to transition. So I think some of the most important things is being able to articulate that. If you are transferring or want to transfer from student activities or union operations or career into res life, it's a whole new world. And the form letter is not going to cut it. The form resume is not going to cut it. So I think one of the most important pieces of advice about transferable skills is that you have to make it explicitly clear. Employers are not going to spend tons of time trying to pick apart your resume and find it. You have to highlight it for them. Because I know I can look at a resume and see assistant resident director as a grad. I more or less know what that means. If you say program assistant and are not articulate in your cover letter of what that means and how that specific skill set is going to help me as an employer and is going to help our students and help our department and our team, then I'm going to go with the people that I know and the job and the skill sets that I know. So in terms of overall transferable skills, I think great supervision is never going out of style. Management of people is never going out of style. Project management, so the ability to see both short-term needs and tasks and long-term goals and projects and how all of those lead to one another. I don't think you'll find a functional area where project management isn't somewhere. If it's a committee, if it's a program, if it's working with a vendor, if it's opening the residence halls, all of those things have small pieces that you have to keep track of and big picture things that if the little stuff isn't with it or together, the end goal is not going to get there. I think something for me, and this is because I've been in Jesuit higher ed forever, is the ability to think about what matters to the institution and what is my role in that. And I think you can find that anywhere. You know, what is my role going to be at an HBCU? What is it going to look like at a community college? How does my work go towards the bigger goals? Is also another transferable skill that no matter the functional area, you need to be good at it to be even better for the field.
And I'll answer a little bit from the candidate side of that as someone who was a little bit more open through a lot of my searches. So I was student activities, but I also had very strong interest in the possibility of doing career services or some things that are a little bit more curriculum based over on the academic side. And I would say that a really big part of that is what have you done to show that you're interested in it other than being interested in it? So be about it, so to speak. So if you have opportunities where maybe it wasn't in your job description to work in the library, but you had opportunities to create collaborative relationships and you decided to work with the library and built an initiative that worked. Or maybe it was something where you were in student activities and were curious about res life, so you shadowed somebody on call for an extended period of time. Some of the incidents you might have encountered, some of the things you were still like curious about. I'll be the hippy-dippy person, which can really be the answer given by somebody who's doing this work in a weird way now, and say that curiosity is really important. So being curious enough to not just say, I want to do this work a different way from how I've been doing it, but I'm curious enough to get in, get dirty, and try it out, even if it's not necessarily the thing that I know that I'm going to be doing. So one year when I was interning at Brown, it was a live-on student activities position, but I also had the opportunity to do collaborative work with the resident staff. So I knew that I wasn't going to have the opportunity to be on call because I wasn't in the rotation, so I shadowed people that were on call. And I wasn't necessarily going to have the opportunity to do some of the more inventory-based pieces or operations things, so I helped that staff out when they needed the opportunity. So I could say, I've done this, here's how I experienced it. Do I like it, first of all? And second of all, is it something that I can see myself doing, and what elements of it was I really good at? So I would say, as you're looking at transitioning into something, get to know it well enough to know that it's somewhere you're going to want to land. Because I think sometimes you get glamour stories about it and things. It's like, oh, well, it's easier over here than it would be where you are. And you just go with that. You don't always check in with it. So be sure that you have done enough of it to be able to speak intelligently about it and know that it's somewhere you're going to want to land. Mm-hmm. And as you answer the question of why you want to leave that area, because that question will occasionally come up, I see you're leaving residence life. What made you draw to that decision? Draw on some of those experiences, how you felt when you've done some of those things in practice, or recognizing the role that the new position might have in student development and why that's important to you. So speaking less about like, oh, I'm leaving this area, and more, here's what I'm attracted to in the area that you're in, can be really helpful.
Mm-hmm. And I would say also be really intentional about the questions in which you ask to help head off some of those concerns the employer may have. So asking a question of, as you know, I don't have any residence life experience, what do you think the biggest transitions would be for me? Or what areas do you think that I need to get, you know, kind of more experience in or more information about before I hit the ground running? One, as an employer, I'm like, okay, look at you. You're already thinking about your transition. You're already thinking about concerns that I have. But then also you can use that information in the next round. So incorporating, we talked last time that I don't have any crisis management. Here's some things that I've done, or I've done this, or I've done this, or I've been thinking about this, to kind of get ahead of any concerns that may arise from going from one functional area to another.
Okay, so now I'm going to jump in with a little bit of a sticky situation question. So we have a question posed about, say you're trying to apply for a new position, and that position asks for a reference or the opportunity to contact your current supervisor, but you don't want that current supervisor contacted, either because you don't have a great relationship with them, or you're not comfortable with what they might say, or maybe you're not a fan of how they do their work and you're not necessarily looking to have that associated with you. What do you do? And that's a really hard question, because most places, as a default, independent of anything that we as a department might do because of human resources, they're going to ask. So you'll have a little bit trouble getting through the initial screening if you don't provide that. I would say if it's something where you're truly sure that you don't want to include your current supervisor, that you should see about having somebody else in that organization that can speak strongly to how you work. So that might be another coworker in your office that might be senior to you, maybe somebody in the organization who you consider a mentor, or somebody above you that can speak well on your behalf. So having a reference of how you do that work, even if it's not necessarily the direct reference that they're looking for, is something that's going to be important to have. Now, I will say that that does have the potential to hurt you, and I feel it's a responsible thing to say because some organizations are going to have a really hard time with that. It creates a vacuum, and we're not great with vacuums just as humans overall, because you start to fill things in on your own that may not be true, but if you're imaginative enough, you can start to fill things in and say, well, maybe they didn't do it because this, that, or the other thing that's not going to look favorably upon you. And in reality, that might not be the case. So being careful to walk that line of not speaking ill of the supervisor, but being able to speak eloquently about why that person isn't the best representation of your good work is going to be really important. So put a lot of thought into how you address that. Expect the question. If possible, anticipate it and try to address it in a diplomatic fashion in your cover letter, which we'll talk a little bit later about what the cover letter really should be designed to do. And one of those things is being able to answer questions that will come up elsewhere. You're given that space to use it. So that's one opportunity to do that. And I know it's kind of an incomplete answer, but it's a difficult question. It's got a lot of sticky points in it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and Amma and I were kind of talking through this before, and I think it's also important to know that that person may be called anyway. If you don't list them anywhere, it's still possible that an informal reference, i.e. an employer that's like, I don't care, I want to talk to who directly supervises you, that could still happen. So thinking about what that relationship looks like, is that person prepped? Do they know that they could be called anyway? Do they know that you're even searching right now? Because just because they're not listed as a reference doesn't mean they're not going to find out about it. And I think that's important. That's not great. I don't like that. I don't like that the field does that, but it happens often. It's a small field, and that's not to intimidate anyone or make anyone scared, but it's often the reality that I'll bump into somebody, or I know somebody, or I'm just going to pick up the phone and call that person. And I don't care if it's ethical or unethical. So making sure that you're ready for that possibility, because I think it is sometimes a possibility, which sucks, but it is what it is to a certain extent.
Yeah, I'll agree. I know that for my part, as I was interviewing for graduate school assistantships, one of the people that I happened to interview in an office knew my boss and called my boss. And that's how she found out that I was interviewing. So she called me into her office and said, I didn't know you were searching. And I was 22 at that point and no capacity to handle that gracefully. So I don't even remember what I did. I feel like I blacked it out. But the fact of the matter is, at any point, people that we know, and I don't like it's a small field, it's a small world. And you'd be shocked with how many people know how many people. And I know that the 6 degree separation now, because of social media, has gone down to something like 3.25, which is a whole other tangent, and I won't do that. But suffice it to say, if someone knows somebody and they're comfortable talking to that person, especially if that person knows somebody and they don't know you, it might happen anyway. So there's still going to be some finesse involved on your part with that person with whom you have a sticky relationship to say, this is the situation I'm in. Please look out for this. Maybe you don't have to air all of the grievances that you have right away, but part of the consideration that you're taking to let them know, even a brief heads up and say you might get a phone call, could be the difference between what you perceive to be a bad reference and an even worse reference because they were blindsided. And that's not spiteful necessarily, that's human nature. So that's something to look out for as well. It's not a good thing. I don't like it. I think there are a lot of parts of interviews, again, across the board, we're not the only people that do this, that aren't done with the best interest of the candidate at heart. And I would say for those of you in the position to serve in that capacity later on, don't do this to people if you can avoid it. It's a very, very difficult thing. And putting yourself out there for a position in a lot of ways means you're making yourself really vulnerable, and you're giving people more vulnerability than they might be ready for by taking on things that they're not prepared for. So from a consideration standpoint, I would encourage you to not do that to people if you can avoid it.
Absolutely. Another question that's come through is looking for advice with patience throughout the search. So kind of the question of, can you apply to too many jobs? So quality versus quantity. Take it from the gal that had 22 first round interviews at TPE. You can absolutely apply for too many jobs. I had, the giant notebook with tabs with everything, and I thought I knew everything, and I still got frazzled. And as we've established, I really like talking about myself, and like interviews are my jam. And it was still too many. Now, with that being said, I think you need to be really realistic of, if you're doing a very focused search like me, like I only have 28 schools that I'm ever going to apply for. So I need to know if that one application, if those 2 applications don't work out, I have to be okay with staying. And if you get the feeling in the pit of your stomach of like, I can't be in my current position another year, I can't do another round of this, I can't do another round of SGA, elections or panhandle recruitment, or like if I move another cart in, I'm gonna scream, then you need to apply for more. And I think the idea of a fit is really important, but the idea of kind of holistic fit, that you can maybe move to something where you really, really like your job, but you love your life. You love where you are. You love being with your partner. You love being closer to your family. You love, no more snow and being able to surf. And you're, doing good work and you're doing right by your students, but it's not this like awakening of, vocational discernment for you. For some people, that's really important, and that's okay. And keep searching until you find that. But I think it's about knowing what you want and what you're willing to settle for. I think especially with how many grads there are in the field, I think people are going to be without jobs longer and longer. And then in the mid-level, sort of, like the triangle, there's a bunch down here and less as you go. That's the reality. So I think if you need to get out of your position because you're not doing good work and you're unhappy and your unhappiness is impacting the student experience, then yeah, you need to apply to more. and maybe I don't want to live in Nebraska that much, but this job is really exciting. Or maybe, you know, student activities isn't completely my thing, but I like pieces of it, and I know I'm going to be so happy outside of work. I think that's okay. I think we do ourselves a disservice when we say, like, you have to be passionate about your job. Like, I want you to be passionate about your life. And I think people read that desperation from employers. I know I've talked with people of like, you just want to get out of your job. You don't want to get into this job. And I think that's a really important distinction to make. Do you just want out of your job, or do you want into these specific positions? And only you can say that. So for some people, that's going to be 50 applications. For some people, that's going to be 20. For some, it's going to be 150 because they're willing to go anywhere because they just need to get out. So keeping in mind the comparison game, I think, is super, super duper important.
And I would say, especially for first-time searchers, there is a lot of that patience that is informed by comparison, as Marci said. So sometimes you searching on your own and being patient with a search is very different from having to be patient within the context of a larger group, like 30 or 32 or 40 or however many are in your cohort. And I remember from our capstone class, post-placement, first thing we did in every class was who got a job. And it hurt sometimes to have to sit in that and be the person, A, who didn't have anything to report back, or B, having friends in that group who didn't have anything to report back and being somebody that did. And it was a really, really hard thing to endure. So I would say, in terms of comparison, while natural, is hard to use as a metric of if you're doing the right thing or getting to the right place, because some people finding their right fit, if their net is wide, they'll catch it a little bit earlier. That's just numbers. Some of it, if you're in a field like Res Life, which is, again, a wide net into itself, and they get caught in that net early, especially because those positions are open earlier and sometimes start earlier, that's going to be something that you as an individual candidate, through no fault of your own, have no control over. So being aware of comparison being an effect on patients, I think, is a big part of it. I had another thing to say. Oh, vocational discernment. I love that you said that, because that's a super Jesuit thing. But yeah, being able to find a position that fits within your life, and if you're somebody that wants to have a life and needs a job that allows that, you're absolutely allowed to look for that, and you're not in the wrong at all if that's something that's a priority to you. The search is about the job, but it's also about the person and the life that's going to allow that work to happen. So being able to have a job that allows you to be done by 4:30 because you have a family, or because you do something else on the side that requires some of your time after standard business hours, if a job doesn't fit that, you're allowed to turn that down if that's something that's important to you. And that may be part of the patience piece, is the things that are available may not be able to make that fit, but that's on you to figure out, what are the things that I need, and what am I willing to stand up and say, I can't give this up, no thank you. So keeping all of that in mind as well.
Mm-hmm. And also realizing that like all of this comes with a lot of privilege. So knowing that there are folks out there that saying no to a job is not a reality. Like, the loans are coming, the formula needs to be done, I got to get money back to home, you know, to mom and dad. And knowing that we shouldn't be placing judgment on that, right? So we shouldn't be saying, oh, they've settled for a job. They are making do with what is important to them, and knowing that those values may conflict with your own, and kind of giving people a break sometimes. I think can sometimes be this like elitism in the field of like, oh, well, you didn't wait long enough, or like you're only doing that because you're close to the family. Like, if they're taking a position because it's filling their needs, whatever those needs may be, that's an awesome life choice, and we should be cheering that on, and not, oh, I can't believe they did that, you know, behind their backs. I think it's really easy to become petty in the job search, especially if you're in a cohort-based program where everybody's in this like vortex of emotions for 6 months, and just select yourself out of that and you'll be a lot healthier, I think, at least.
Agreed. All right, so we have a couple other points that we just wanted to get to in general. I'll start with cover letters. So a lot of people hate them, and I don't know if I'm biased to enjoy them because I identify first as a writer and second as anything else, but I've found a way to make them less terrible, so I figure I should share that so that people don't hate the process abstractly, thinking there's no way to get out of it. And to me, I think it's about not necessarily having a form, but having a set of stories that you feel really comfortable with and really strongly about. So I remember there were some jobs that were in, I think, graduate res life housing, which was one of the areas that I looked at early on. And it was something that I didn't have a whole lot of experience in, but I had a really good story about something that I did at an event when I didn't know what to do. And the kind of thinking and the thought process that got me to how I found that solution and what I ended up doing for the best result for that student. And I tend to put that story out early in that cover letter and said, I would treat this job, which is not something I have a whole lot of experience with, the same way I did the scenario with that student. Quickly assess the resources that I have, see what's available to me, and then respond in a manner that helped the student get what they needed ultimately. And people responded to that. There were people I actually talked to later on in that search process that said, not everybody was able to figure out that you were right for that position, but nobody forgot that cover letter. So being able to find those unforgettable stories of things that you've done that could be applied to the jobs that you want can make it a little bit less of what's in this description and what have I done and how many years have I been doing this and how do I write that and how do I make it not seem boring. People respond to stories. Our brains are wired to do that. So if you can find a way to tell a story that details a lot of that information, use that over the robotic translation of, you're asking for this, I can do this. The overwhelming majority of the time, that's going to serve you really well. So using that letter as a space to give people a rounder idea of who you are and how you respond to situations. We also talked a little bit earlier about using the cover letter as a place to answer questions. So things that might come up on the standard HR application or things on your resume that raise questions, you can provide answers in your cover letter. So for example, if you did have a situation where a direct supervisor wasn't on your reference sheet, but you have some sort of explanation as to who better speaks to your work, or a relationship with a coworker that you maybe had a scenario that you went through together and you would rather have that person's testimony as a result, say that there. I think that's a little bit more powerful than, I see you're asking for supervision experience and I've supervised 6 people. That is helpful information to have, but they're probably going to find that anyway. Use cover letters to tell the stories that aren't already there, or to show the information that isn't already available. Telling a new version of the story, perhaps, and that might be a little bit more helpful and a little bit more constructive. So I hope that that makes it a little bit easier. Start with the story and not necessarily regurgitation of information they already have.
Yeah, find a way to make it interesting. I love it when I read a cover letter and I think to myself, I've never thought to do XYZ, supervision or staff development or social justice or committee or whatever. I've never thought about it before. I really want to know more about that person. So thinking of what sort of, what kind of hook can you make that reader think to themselves, I have to talk to this person. I need to know more about them. I think is really important and something I'm always looking for as an employer. It's not an extended resume. And I think so many people use it as just, okay, I didn't have a chance to have put these 3 bullets underneath the big bullet, so I'm going to do it in a cover letter. Like, no, make it interesting. Make it a holistic version of who you are as a candidate and as a person. So I think that's also super important. What do you want to talk about next? I'm looking at our thing of what makes sense.
Communication patterns. Let's talk about that, because I think one of the biggest things that we got when we first mentioned we were doing this was it takes a really long time to hear back and we don't like it. So let's talk about that.
Oh my God, yes. Let's just put it out there. We're terrible. And I think one thing that's important, especially if you've never been a part of a search process or a committee before, is that often, especially at larger institutions, especially at state institutions, and especially at institutions that have an eye on the bottom line, is that HR drives the bus a lot of times, like more often than you think. Okay, again, I think in images, so I'm thinking of Speed, where like HR, Sandra Bullock.
I was also thinking about Speed. I was like, how is it? I was like, how can I compare this to Speed? And then you did. Yes.
There it is. There it is. So HR is driving the bus, but we're really trying to get it under control, is I think maybe the best. This is the best pop culture reference I think I've ever done in my life. So,
and we're trying to get it to go faster, because if it goes under a certain speed, things go down. No, this is actually perfect.
Oh my God, it's perfect in so many ways. Awesome. So just knowing that a lot of times it's not a reflection of the department. I won't say always. I think everyone can do a much better job at being communicative with candidates. And I think something I tweeted a couple weeks ago was, what if we treated candidates the way we did with students or parents or families? Would it be okay for an email to sit from a student for a month? I'm guessing no. I'm guessing your supervisor would have something to say about that. So thinking about, as quickly as you can and as honestly as you can, being communicative from an employer point of view. I think it's also, I know for me, like, I'm an empathetic person and I don't want to tell people, okay, you're not right for this. It's just not going to work. One, because that's hard to do, and I think the field in general sucks with hard feedback. But two, you don't want to cut people loose before you know where you are in your process. So right now we have, let's say I have 60 candidates. I know likely 20 of them are never going to make it, through based on their experiences and their cover letters. But I don't know for sure, because my top 40 candidates actually could be terrible at TPE or could choose to go to other positions. So it's this constant hedging our bets, which slows things down. That's not an excuse. That's not a reason, but that's sometimes the reality. I think also as a candidate, thinking about the ways in which you're communicated with. So, are you receiving form letters? Are they including something personal? Are they, saying that they're going to be transparent and then not? You can pick up a lot of things from the first time you're communicated with from an employer. So I think a lot of times we say, oh, once you're on campus, you'll know if it's a fit. You're picking up information about personality and what it's like to work there and what are the priorities from the moment that you apply. And not waiting until you're 4 months into the process to decide, wait a second, you're really disorganized and I just now realized it. You can pick up on those things throughout the process if you're looking for them. So communication sucks. We need to be better. Not always our fault, but sometimes it is. Is perhaps a more eloquent way of stating what I just talked about for 5 minutes.
We had a speed run before. I'll take it. I will take it.
Great.
I would say to add to that, being cognizant of the circumstances on campus. So I think about some of the campuses, for example, that have experienced unrest over the past semester. So a campus has been having protests, or a campus has had student deaths, or other things that are going on. Odds are, if you would apply for a position during those times, you're not going to hear back. And being cognizant of what else could be going on campus and being able to, from an employee perspective, a prospective employee perspective, being able to be patient and flexible and just flat out understanding if someone says next week, maybe next week. And just having that in your head from the jump off can be helpful. But I would also say from the employer perspective, even if you're not prepared to do something yet, if that timeline passes, there's no harm in saying, we're not there yet, or it's taking us a little bit longer, because that gives people a little bit of peace of mind, which I would hope from a human perspective you want to do. And I would say one of the best positions that I interviewed for that ultimately ended up not being filled was an institution that every now and again said, hey, just to let you know, here's where the process is. And it was an anticipated opening, and part of that was the person in the position wasn't able to vacate it yet, and they were still trying to decide how that was going to go, which to me, as a prospective employee, was helpful because A, I had information I needed, but also endeared me to that institution because if I were ever in that position, I know they would be patient with me. So again, from it being a two-sided thing, what can you learn from that pattern of communication as a candidate? I was also really attentive to, because having time outside of work and being attentive to when I was working and when I wasn't was very important to me. I paid attention to when communication came in. So if things were consistently coming in at 2, 3 in the morning, sent from iPhones late at night, really, really early in the morning, it then dawned on me, is that an expectation of me when I get in that position? Particularly because I was looking for things that didn't have on-call components, didn't have on-duty components. What does that say about how they're going to expect me to communicate or be available? And is that something that I want to be a part of? And yeah, it's not always reflective because some of it's personal style, but if you start hearing from different people and things start to pop up as potential trends and you're attentive to that, that could give you an idea of if it's the right place for you. Like Marci said, don't wait until on campus to see if there's a fit. Start looking for smaller cues leading up to that, like those types of communications.
Right. And just one plug from the employer point of view, anything as you as a candidate would want from the employer, you too need to be doing. So if you are no longer interested, if you have 12 on-campus interviews, if you have accepted a position and everybody that you applied with from TPE, they still think you're an active candidate. So doing your due diligence to close those loops. Like I still have in my head the names of candidates that never told us that they were out of the process. Like I saw on Twitter a job announcement of like, awesome, good for you. I'm so excited you got a position. I shouldn't have to find out about it on social media as an employer. So being professional and being courteous endears you, because you never know when you may want to apply for a similar position, or if that person goes to another job and the last experience they have with you is a candidate that has hung them out to dry, basically. So just realizing all of this is a two-way street, and doing due diligence as a candidate is also super duper important and very much appreciated from an employer standpoint.
All right, we are running short on time, which we have other stuff, so we'll figure out how to get that to you. Just a quick plug, I know I have a form on my website, and I'll send it to Marci as well so she can do it. If you want more resources on this, including some of the links that we talked about, a few articles that we have that are helpful, and actually also a coupon code for resume and cover letter service if that's something that you're interested in, we have a code for you to get a discount on it. Send us an email. So send us a note letting us know you want in, send us your email address. You can also fill out the form on my website, and I'll send it to Marci as well so you can fill it out on hers, and let us know you want that information. We'll send it out in the next week or so. So keep an eye out for that. So Marci, closing argument.
Closing arguments. Know what you need. Know what's important to you, know what you're looking for, and know what your non-negotiables are. And know that it's totally fine if that's different than the person sitting next to you at TPE, or your cohort mate across from you in class, or what your parents are saying in your ear, or what your professors are saying. I think people get into trouble in the job search when they're not really clear about what it is that they're looking for, and they take sort of the scattershot approach versus being okay and kind of sitting in their own truth of what's important in the job search. I would say also make sure that you're making decisions both with your head and your heart. I mentioned before, I'm a super empathetic, like, oh God, whatever I'm feeling, that's the decision that I make, and it's not a good way to go through life. So making sure that for those types of people, you're thinking about it through a logical, analytical point of view. I know the people that I process with, like, have zero empathy whatsoever. Everything's through a logical standpoint. And then I would say the opposite, if you're a really logical person, talk through it with somebody who has maybe a little more of that emotional intelligence that could point out, okay, but you said this about the supervisor, or you said this about the student body, like, have you thought about what that could mean? And I'll be including a great resource that I put together of if you're an emotive person, how can you think about things logically, which will also be on the website. But knowing that if you make a heart decision, your head could be kicking yourself, a couple years down the road, and vice versa, because it is about what is best for you in that moment of your life, as well as that moment of your career. Take us home, Amma.
I like it. I would add to what Marci said and basically say that as much as you can, bring yourself to that interview. So I feel like a lot of us have like interview you and then regular you. And as much as you can, merge those two together. Because at the end of the day, if interview you and actual you are markedly different, actual you is going to have to go to work every day. If interview you is going to work every day, it's going to start to hurt after a little while. And that's where you'll end up in situations where things are so congruent that you're sending 150, 200 resumes to get out. So knowing, again, like Marci said, what you need, but also who you're going to be in that position and how that's going to fit in with the organization that you're a part of, as much as you can, again, recognizing that sometimes you just need a job. How much of you are you going to be able to bring to that job? And where does that start for you? Ideally at the beginning. So knowing if you're a super silly person, as I find myself to be, I need to be in an office where people are okay with that. And so far, I've been incredibly lucky to be able to have that because it was something that I prioritized. And being able to be the type of person who informs their practice with a lot of research and a lot of reading and recognizing that there would need to be time for that. Some positions I've had fit better than others, but I got better at articulating that earlier on and making sure that there was space for those things. So who are you going to be in that job every day? And how can you show that to the people that are deciding if you're going to be there? Because it gives them the best opportunity to find the person that they really need. Who knows, maybe something that you're hiding or keeping buttoned up is something that they really need, and they might not see it from you. So bring as much of you as you can to this whole process, and you'll end up being a lot happier.
Ditto.
All right, well, that is it for us, but thank you so much to everybody that joined us. Again, please get in touch if you want some of the additional resources. Share this replay with anybody you think you might need it. And Marci, thank you so much for bringing your brilliant and insightful self to this conversation. Could not have done it without you.
Right back at you, Marfo. Right back at you.
All right. Enjoy your night, everybody. Take care. Good luck with this process. And please feel free to keep in touch if you have any other questions. Have a great night, all.
Bye, everyone.